Hello and welcome to Twist List. Today we are looking at 10 well-known disasters and their deadlier historical counterparts. The human mind seems to be programmed to think that things did not happen unless one can personally recall it happening. Historians must fight an uphill battle with the general population to convince them that the terrors and tragedies that haunt modern life are often but repetitions of historical events that have already destroyed lineages, families, and communities. These are calamities that, if they happened today, would have graced the pages of tabloids, clogged up Facebook feeds, and inspired a million differently colored ribbons and GoFundMe campaigns. We think that we're the generation who has had it the hardest, the most dangerous, the most terrifying. Not so. Here are 10 modern disasters you probably remember and their older, often deadlier, counterparts. The 9th spot on the list is occupied by the 1967 Silver Bridge disaster and the 1807 Ebola tragedy. While you may not immediately know the name of the Silver Bridge, it was a suspension bridge that passed between West Virginia and Ohio at the West Virginian town of Point Pleasant. Point Pleasant was made famous by the legend of Mothman, a giant winged creature which many believed came to warn the township of the impending collapse of the Silver Bridge. In December 1967, as commuters working in Ohio were driving home to Point Pleasant and West Virginians were going to Ohio for some Christmas shopping, a link of the suspension chain broke, and the bridge collapsed. The collapse was sudden, pitching vehicles into the water and killing 46 people. It was a terrible tragedy that shook the small community and also entered the public psyche due to its connection with the Mothman legend. In 1807, the Ebola Bridge, which spans the Sumida River in Tokyo, was already over a century old. It was a wooden bridge that connected an area of temples with the city of Tokyo. There was confusion and dispute over who is responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the bridge, and as a result, it was not properly cared for. Each side was looked after by a different community. In 1807, excited residents of the Fukugawa side rushed to a festival that was being held on the Edo side. The weight of the throng caused the old bridge to collapse, depositing 1,400 people into the river, where they drowned. To compound the tragedy, more and more eager festival-goers pushed from the back of the crowd, unable to see what had happened. A stream of people fell in the river until an official with a sword physically prevented the crowd from pushing more unfortunate souls to their deaths. 2. Number 8 on our list is the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and the 1556 Shaanxi Earthquake. When Westerners think big, scary, city-destroying earthquake, the 1906 San Francisco earthquake possibly springs to mind. There are still people alive who remember their relatives talking about it, and there are a lot of accessible photos on the internet that show the incredible damage to buildings in the San Francisco area. At least 700 people died, fires raged, and the magnitude of the earthquake has been estimated more recently at 7.9 on the newer moment magnitude scale. Make no mistake, the earthquake was devastating, tragic, and history-changing. But in the business of sheer destruction, it was eclipsed by the 1556 Shaanxi earthquake. Early in the morning in the provinces of Shaanxi and Shaanxi, China, an estimated magnitude 8 earthquake struck. The outcome was catastrophic, and more than 800,000 deaths were attributed to the tremor and resulting floods and fires. 60% of the populations of these provinces are believed to have been killed. Whole families, towns, and communities were wiped out, along with mountains and river courses. Huge crevices opened in the ground, and landslides decimated villages. 3. As a result of the devastation, many of the survivors rebuilt with wood and bamboo instead of stone, making their villages and communities safer for future earthquakes. The Shaanxi earthquake is the deadliest ever recorded, and yet it sparks much less interest than the San Francisco quake, despite the fact that many hundreds of thousands more people died. This may not have been the case had there been photography in the 1500s. Hopefully, life-saving lessons have been learned from this disaster.
The
and an earthquake will never
Halifax
cause destruction on this scale again. 1626 Swangongchong explosion. If you ever go to the beautiful city of Halifax in Nova Scotia, do yourself a favor and go on a harbor cruise. There, you will get an informative tour of the harbor, which explores what happened in the 1917 explosion that flattened much of Halifax in the actual spot where the tragic events began. On December 6, 1917, 2 ships partook in a tragic trying to get around you dance in the harbor that resulted in a collision. One of the ships, the Montana Blanc, was carrying munitions for use on the World War I battlefront. When the ships collided, the Montana Blanc initially burned, and thousands watched as the thick smoke filled the air. It was an interesting distraction from an ordinary day. Then the ship blew up, killing 2,000 people and injuring and blinding 9,000, including those who had stopped their daily activity to watch. The explosion was so big it caused a tsunami that added to the wide-scale destruction. Houses even lost windows in the town of Truro, 100 kilometers, 60 miles, away. In 1626, the Wangongchong Armory in Beijing was packed full of weapons, including gunpowder. It was secured behind thick walls and seemed virtually indestructible. Then, oddly, a plume of smoke was noticeable above the armory. Then came a bang that was felt 150 kilometers, 90 miles, away and vaporized everything in a 2-kilometer, 1.2 miles, radius. About half of Beijing was destroyed by what eyewitnesses say was a mushroom cloud of death. Body parts and building materials rained down on survivors in a pink mist. The cause of the explosion has been theorized to have been everything from a tornado to an earthquake to an intergalactic nuclear warhead. The strange mushroom cloud and the severity of the blast is equated to the nuclear bomb dropped on Hiroshima, have inspired many a conspiracy theorist collapse. While not everyone may know about the Hyatt Regency survivors were claimed to have flown up to 100 or sat in on engineering lectures because they're a nerd would absolutely know about it. Lucky person survived the blast television shows and much media coverage of the tragedy, which has led to the collapse being remembered well and remaining in the popular psyche. The atrium of the Hyatt Regency in Kansas City, Missouri, had 3 tiers of suspended walkway around the inside on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors. On July 17, 1981, a tea dance was in full swing, and people were dancing on the floor of the atrium as well as on the suspended walkways. Without warning, the 4th floor walkway crashed onto the 2nd floor walkway, which crashed to the ground, killing 114 people. It is the deadliest structural disaster in the United States to date, but the AD 27 collapse of a wooden amphitheater in Fideni, Italy, was far beyond anything that any modern average Joe could comprehend. The amphitheater was, by all reports, cheaply built in a rush. When the wooden structure collapsed, 20,000 people died, and more were maimed and injured. Modern medicine and infrastructure would struggle to cope with such a disaster. One wonders how Rome, only 8 kilometers, 5 miles, away, coped with a tragedy of this scale. 5. The 5th spot on the list is occupied by the 2016 Ghost Ship Fire and the 1942 Coconut Grove Fire. In 2016, the world was rocked by the news of the tragic fire in the Ghost Ship Collective. There is a special poignancy awarded to tragedies that happen in places that are meant to be fun and give relief from the stressors of everyday living. The ghost ship was a bohemian artist's residence and performance space that had been created inside an old warehouse in Oakland, California. Filled with flammables such as art supplies and electrical cords, the lower floor had rented mobile accommodations, and the upper floor had a space that was used for concerts and dance parties. It was at such a dance party on December 2, 2016, that a fire broke out in the poorly ventilated and fire safety non-compliant building. 36 people were killed and 2 injured in the dark, confusing, and illegal structure as the floors collapsed in on each other. As tragic as the ghost ship collective fire was, the sheer enormity of the death toll of the 1942 Coconut Grove nightclub fire is horrifying. In the midst of the war-torn early 1940s, on November 28, 1942, to be exact, anyone who was anyone at all in Boston was at the Coconut Grove. Featuring 2 stories, a first floor of dining and dancing and a bar in the basement called the Melody Lounge, the Coconut Grove was the popular choice for the discerning night owl, after a worker accidentally set an artificial palm tree on fire in the Melody Lounge. On the list, a huge fireball and cloud of toxic gas traveled quickly through the basement area and up the stairs. Disaster. When people say that they have a fear and were crushed against the glass by the weight of those pushing are unreasonable and the result of anxiety. 1,000 people in the building will note that there are many thousands of reasons why people should be wary of crowds. Were injured, all of them dead. Though the fire department arrived quickly and put out the blaze with appropriate speed, final between the stacks of dead and not injured near the doors sold out. Hard to get into the wounded and to let air and fears of violence trapped inside, and the club with a larger number of fans. The survivors of this disaster were the first to receive the smaller end as a non-test drug to help fight infections from the closest to the game were divided into pens, into which fans could go in and out through narrow entrances. However, the very narrow entrances and too many fans meant that there were people pressed up against the barriers and climbing fences to escape from the push of spectators trying to get in to see the start of the game. In all, 96 fans died, crushed to death under the weight of each other. The 1809 Ponte dos Barcas incident was a different type of calamity in that it wasn't a peacetime disaster, but the magnitude of deaths by drowning was far greater and also included thousands of children. The tragedy was also brought on by the weight of a rush of people. When Napoleon invaded Portugal with his huge army, the citizens of the peaceful Portuguese city of Porto fled onto the Ponte dos Barcas bridge over the River Douro and sank the pontoon structure under their combined weight. An estimated 6,000 people drowned. Whole generations of a city were left bereft. 7. At the third place we have, the 2012 sinking of the Costa Concordia has become synonymous with terrible captaincy and the horrors of cruise ships in general. On January 13, 2012, Captain Francesco Schettino began his dive down into the history books as the notorious perpetrator of an unnecessary maritime disaster that killed 32 people on board. Going way off course, Captain Schettino had ordered the ship too close to Giglio Island, where she hit a rock. What happened afterward was a completely shambolic misadventure, with the ship drifting around in the water for hours, the captain and crew leaving the vessel with passengers still on it, and said passengers being repeatedly told that things were fine when they absolutely were not fine. While everyone knows about the Costa Concordia, The modern reader is probably not as familiar with the 1120 sinking of the White Ship in the English Channel, while 300 people did tragically lose their lives. The reason that the wreck of the White Ship went down in history as such a momentous disaster is that the heir of King Henry I of England drowned on the fateful night of November 25, 1120. Prince William was set to not only inherit what is now modern England but also Normandy. He boarded what was very much a party boat with a half-brother and half-sister, Richard and Matilda. Everyone, crew included, was very possibly completely drunk, and the ship hit a rock and capsized. Despite the calm sea, few could swim at that time, and the sole survivor was a butcher with the rather awesome name of Berold. The king was overcome with grief at the loss of his legitimate heir, William, and two much-loved bastards. The sinking of the White Ship has now become somewhat of a medieval murder mystery to suspicious-minded historians. The 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens wasn't long ago, and millions of people can remember the event clearly. You can even watch it on YouTube. On May 18, 1980, a geologist, David Johnston, was stationed to monitor the growing bulge on the north flank of the volcano, which had officials worried. An earthquake triggered an enormous landslide, which triggered the eruption, shooting ash, water, and rock debris 18,000 meters, 60,000 feet, into the air. 57 people died from the blast, and the shape and landscape of the region changed forever. David Johnston radioed in some data and was then obliterated, wiped out by the enormous blast of the volcano. Everything within 600 square kilometers, 230 mi2, around the volcano was destroyed by the blast, and a larger area experienced damage and inconvenience from ash, smoke, and mud flows from the volcano. However, the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia was beyond devastating. Gunung Tambora exploded on April 10 after several warning tremors on April 5. The blast, pyroclastic flow, and resulting tsunamis caused a mega-catastrophic event that killed 10,000 people and destroyed over 35,000 homes. The resulting starvation and disease killed a further 80,000 Indonesians. The ash cloud from the volcano blocked the sun and caused global temperatures to drop an average of 3 degrees Celsius, 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit, and 1816 became known as the year without a summer. 9. And finally, at number 1, 2, there was a time not long ago in which the word Ebola was on everybody's lips. Ebola seemed uncontainable and incurable. It reached the US, and anyone traveling from Africa was met with suspicion and fear. It was meant to be the end of the world. Clearly it wasn't. You can tell because you're reading this list. In Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, however, more than 28,000 people caught Ebola, and 11,000 died from the disease, which left whole communities devastated and authorities afraid to bury the dead. Considering the fear and horror that this outbreak caused among those in countries that were not affected, one can only imagine the level of devastation wrought by the European Black Plague, which affected more than just Europe. The scope of such a disaster was immense. The Black Plague killed at least 75 million people, and it killed them horribly. The afflicted were covered with pustules, boils, black gunk, suffering from intense pain, chills, and vomiting, and suddenly, they were dead. People would wake up fine and then die in the course of a day. The disease was spread by rodents and fleas and was airborne as well. The disease also killed poultry, cattle, goats, and sheep. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. You died or you didn't. 10. Mostly, you did. Christy Heather is an author and professional writer from Gippsland in Victoria, Australia. You can read her sentimental writing here and buy her first novel here. Christy is a practicing criminal lawyer and lifelong nerd.
And finally, at number 1, Scythe Chariot. A scythe chariot can be seen in the chariot race of the movie Ben-Hur, operated by Messala, here called a Greek chariot or a beaked chariot. Scythe chariots are seen in the first Colosseum scene in the movie Gladiator. In the film Alexander by Oliver Stone, scythe chariots are shown charging into Macedonian phalanx during the beginning of Battle of Gaugamela scene. This article is licensed under the GFDL because it contains quotations from the Wikipedia articles, crossbow, caltrop, trebuchet, scythe chariot.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, then please hit the subscribe button.